Good morning. I'm Anna Morrow. I'm the program manager for the Midwest Cover Crops Council. And I am joined by Alex Rosa, who's one of our board members. He's with Bayer Crop Science, and Matt Ruark with University of Wisconsin Extension. So they're going to be helping me out with our nutrient management webinar this morning. Okay, so as you have seen this week, our website has been updated. So we've got new content on planting, equipment, and what used to just be management is now nutrient management. So that's what we're going to go over today. And there's the web link. You can find it by clicking that on that bar under Getting Started or just our website /nutrient management. So cover crops are an addition to cash cropping systems, and so they do require some additional management. Our nutrient management will be a little different in a cropping system with cover crops because those cover crops are taking up and releasing nutrients. And so we do need to pay attention to some management. It's very influenced by a lot of things. So soil type, climate, lots of details go into nutrient management with cover crops. And so this website is very general, as you'll see. And so we really encourage you to get in touch with your local extension office, your agronomist, to really manage the finer details. But we did want to provide some information on our website about just general nutrient management when it comes to incorporating cover crops. So this is kind of our overview for today. We'll just go through general nutrient management, what a cover crop needs as far as nutrients, and then the roles of cover crops in terms of nitrogen availability, and then phosphorus and potassium availability. And then we'll kind of go over the details of cover crop nutrient interactions. So as that applies to fertilizer considerations after your cover crop, and then specifically grass cover crops and what we need to be considering, legumes, and then the brassicas and other broadleafs. So we'll go through each section. We'll go through a few slides, and then we'll have an opportunity for Alex and Matt to share, any additional comments or if we have questions and that type of thing. And Claire, I'll probably need your help if we have questions because I don't have that up with my slide share going.
You bet.
So just very basic nutrient management. We encourage you to have a nutrient management plan that has a current soil test report. So that's going to make all the difference with your cash crop. And then as you add cover crops, that's going to get a little more complicated. So we want to make sure that we cover those basics from the beginning. Cover crops are a great option to reduce nutrient loss. They don't necessarily add nutrients to the soil in the short term, but over the long term, they're a good way to build soil health, biological activity, and nutrient cycling. So again, consult your local extension office or agronomist to determine your soil fertility levels and if they're adequate. Cover crop nutrient needs, consider the nutrient needs of your cash crop first. And if you are meeting those needs, you're likely adequate for a cover crop nutrient needs. But we do want to just note that cover crops will require adequate soil fertility to achieve desired biomass. So if you have very low soil fertility levels, your cover crop success will obviously be impacted by that. When it comes to brassicas and mustards, those type of cover crops, they definitely need adequate nitrogen and sulfur. So they have compounds called glucosinolates that have some sulfur included in them, and so it's very important that they have adequate sulfur fertility to meet the needs of the growing cover crop. Alex or Matt, do you have anything to add in terms of just general nutrient management and incorporating a cover crop into your plan?
Yeah, I guess
one thought here is as we talk to farmers that are being successful incorporating cover crops in their operation, I think one of the key factors is when you treat cover crops kind of like a cash crop, right? In terms of how you manage them. And those points that we are talking here in terms of fertility are very important for that successful operation. So when I say treat as a cash crop, make sure you have a system that is prepared to receive those cover crops in your fields, right? Going from selecting the proper ones, seeding rate, equipment that were covered in previous webinars, but also when it comes to nutrient management, right, Anna?
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. We're all excited about nitrogen. Lots of nitrogen questions out there. So we're going to get started with just some basic nutrient management and how cover crops integrate into that system. So when we add any type of crop residue, cash crop or cover crop residue, that's going to stimulate the growth of soil microbes and increase the microbial demand for nutrients, particularly nitrogen. So that's going to kind of ramp up that biological activity, and those microbes are going to need energy and nitrogen to cycle those nutrients. So they'll be using carbon and nitrogen and all the other nutrients as a food source in order to break down that residue. And what happens if the crop residues are low in nitrogen, we will get immobilization of that nitrogen. So the soil microbes don't have enough nitrogen, and they will begin to pull nitrogen from the soil to break down those residues and immobilize that nitrogen for our coming cash crop. The opposite of that is mineralization. And if the nitrogen in our residue is greater than the demand from soil microbes, then that nitrogen will be released from the residue, making it available for plant growth. So that's just the very basics of kind of nitrogen cycling. And we can kind of predict mineralization or immobilization by the carbon to nitrogen ratio of a cover crop residue. Um, so values that exceed 30 parts of carbon to 1 part nitrogen are generally expected to cause nitrogen immobilization. So reducing the available nitrogen for our growing crop. And that's just in the early stages of the decomposition process. So early in that decomposition process, nitrogen will be tied up until that residue decomposes more fully. And this is just a demonstration of some approximate values of C to N values for different crop residues, cover crop residues. You see there about 24-to-1 is the ideal microbe diet. So on the left-hand side of the chart, those types of residues and cover crops would immobilize nitrogen. And on the faster decomposition side to the right, those will mineralize some nitrogen, generally speaking. This is all dependent on the developmental stage of the cover crop and climatic factors and that type of thing. So, Alex or Matt, anything to add?
Well, and just to note that there is still, right, some complexity in this. And it also depends if nutrients have been applied. So like what we've seen in Wisconsin is when we've applied manure, the seed-end ratio of those grass cover crops can actually be lower than expected, but they do not act like the legume cover crops. So there's things are species dependent as well.
Yeah, again, these are very general recommendations, and your specific situation is going to require some additional attention. So moving on to phosphorus and potassium availability. Again, as you use cover crops, that will increase the biological activity in your soils. One way that that happens is through mycorrhizal fungi. They form a symbiotic relationship with plant roots. And so they are able to colonize the plant roots and then spread out into the soil area and allow kind of access to a larger soil pool through their fungal network. So these fungi are able to remobilize phosphorus and other nutrients that would otherwise be out of reach or in forms unavailable to crop roots. So it's very important. It really helps with that nutrient availability for our cover crops and cash crops. And to encourage these mycorrhizal fungi, we'd want to have living roots as much as possible and reduced soil disturbance. So that's going to encourage biological activity and maximize the benefit of our cover crop. The Brassica family doesn't form associations with mycorrhizal fungi, but they do contribute to increased nitrogen or increased nutrient cycling. So those tap roots of most of those Brassica species are able to go deep into the soil profile and access nutrients like phosphorus and bring those up to the top few inches of soil. So again, the availability of these nutrients to subsequently planted cash crops is going to depend on timing of termination and lots of other factors. So again, as the biomass of these brassicas that winter kill decompose really rapidly, so that releases the nutrients in a leachable or available form, including dissolved reactive phosphorus. So this can be a cause for concern especially if those brassicas are planted alone. When they winter kill, they make the nutrients very available because they decompose rapidly, and those nutrients could be subject to loss. So it's always a good idea to plant these species in a mix with another type of cover crop, probably like a grass or something like that. Anything to add here on phosphorus and potassium?
Just quickly, well, when we talk about phosphorus and potassium, then that's when we start going to that direction of long-term benefits, right? That you mentioned in the first couple slides, since those are immobile nutrients, and it will take time and to build that fertility with cover crops with the species that you just mentioned. So that's the importance of thinking on a systems approach, treating those cover crops as cash crops, to think on the system and harvest those benefits as you go.
Okay, moving on to nutrient interactions and some considerations we have with fertilizer. First and foremost, we want to consider the nutrient needs of the cash crop, and particularly if potential nutrients are held in the cover crop residue and how that's going to impact our nutrient management plan for the cash crop. Crops that require nitrogen early, like corn, are going to most likely benefit from some nitrogen applied at or near planting if we're using a grass cover crop. So again, those grasses are nitrogen scavengers. And so we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our cash crop, particularly when we have those grass cover crops ahead of a nitrogen hungry crop like corn. Again, cover crops may reduce the need for nutrient applications with continued use once we get that nutrient cycling really ramped up. But it's important to make sure that cash crops have the nutrients they need at the appropriate times. So we recommend following the 4 R's of nutrient management: right place, rate, time, and source, to to make sure that you're successful in managing nutrients in a cover crop system. Again, the timing of nitrogen and other nutrient release depends on the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the cover crop when it's terminated. So decomposition of high C to N cover crops often results in nitrogen immobilization. So this would be like on our chart, a mature rye or a corn stover has a high C to N ratio. So this will temporarily reduce the plant available nitrogen in the spring as that biomass begins to decompose. And that can cause some stunting in cash crops like corn that have a high nitrogen requirement. And this has been shown to cause some yield drags. So it is really important to consider how you're managing your cover crop and what your nutrient management plan looks like alongside that cover crop plan. So just some very general recommendations to avoid yield drag in corn following a high C to N cover crop. So this is for like basically just the grass species, something that's high C to N. We'd recommend that you terminate overwintering grass cover crops early, so 7 to 10 days ahead of planting corn, or when that cover crop is like 6 to 12 inches tall. So terminating early. You may need to apply some starter fertilizer. Be sure to pay attention to that fertilizer application as some in-furrow applications could cause salt injury to your crop seedlings. And again, check your local resources for specific recommendations for your area and your particular situation. Any comments on fertilizer, Alex or Matt?
That was excellent. I'll just chime in to reiterate. I do really think it's important to use, to have starter nitrogen out following a cover crop for those reasons. So I stress that one quite a bit.
And those rates are going to be dependent on your location. I know, we cover a large area, and so we don't want to make specific fertilizer recommendations because they will vary across the Midwest. Okay, so when we're specifically looking at grass cover crops, there are a few principles that we just like for you to keep in mind for your nutrient management. So small grains and other grass cover crops usually result in initial immobilization of nitrogen during the cash crop season. It could last the whole cash crop growing season. Again, it depends on the cash crop C to N ratio, climate, all types of factors. Grasses aren't considered to be a nitrogen source, but they are very good at scavenging nitrogen. So they will hold that nitrogen, preventing nitrogen loss, and keeping it in the field for years to come. As these grasses break down, nitrogen and other nutrients are going to be released into the soil, but it may not be in a plant usable form. So we're going to see some nutrient cycling, but it may not be immediately available to your cash crop. And I think that those are all the general recommendations we have for grasses. Alex or Matt?
No, I think the big thing, and we talked a lot about the immobilization effect, but also, you talked about that scavenging effect, and these grass cover crops do what we want them to do. They scavenge nitrogen. They help people meet their water quality goals. But it does mean we're starting in a soil profile with less nitrogen. So really keeping a good eye on your nitrogen management, fine-tuning it, moving up some nitrogen applications, using that starter, having nitrogen in your starter application are really important to prevent those negative effects.
Okay. Moving on to legumes, there's a lot of excitement around legumes with nutrient management. So they form They form associations with bacteria in the soil, and they're able to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. So a well-established legume can provide some additional nitrogen to the following crop. The nitrogen becomes available as the soil microbes break down those legumes after termination. So due to that lower C to N ratio, they can return nitrogen to the soil faster than other cover crops like the grasses. And we can estimate the total nitrogen in a cover crop by multiplying above ground biomass by percent nitrogen. So somewhere in that 3.5 to 4% range. And that is just the nitrogen within the plant, not necessarily what would be available to the next crop. So everyone's interested in considerations for taking a nitrogen credit from your cover crop. And this gets really tricky. So you really need to have sufficient biomass to get a meaningful amount of nitrogen from your cover crop. Typically, what we see in the Midwest in corn and soybean rotations, we don't really have enough time for a legume cover crop to produce sufficient biomass for a nitrogen credit. There are farmers who are able to do it. They're making different accommodations in their cash crop growing and legume management to achieve those goals. So it's not something that is typically available, but it can be done. We just don't see it within a traditional corn and soybean rotation in the Midwest. Again, nitrogen release is dependent on many factors, including the maturity of the cover crop. Matt mentioned soil fertility for that cover crop. So if we're applying manure, tillage, the climate, our previous crop, and even then it's only up to half of the biomass nitrogen may be available to this year's crop. So we really have to focus on getting enough biomass to get any type of nitrogen credit from a cover crop. And then again, nitrogen accumulated in the biomass is not the same as fertilizer replacement. So we need to keep that in mind. It's a different form and it's going to cycle in our system differently. So again, follow your regional nutrient management credits. Thoughts on legumes?
Yeah, just to add a quick comment on the legumes is to be successful with legumes, like you said, it's hard in the Midwest, primarily for the reason of timing, right? By the time you're harvesting a cash crop, you are late September, early October, so it really will be a year by year decision. If you have a window that you can plant those legumes early in the fall, that increases your chances to be successful using legumes. But in a lot of cases, because our fall is dry, they are hard to get established, and then there's not enough time for them to thrive during the fall. And then, of course, our hard winters don't do much good to them. So really, when you incorporate those legumes, mixes might be one way to go. Or when I say mixes, could be more than one legume species with a grass or with brassica. So really keep in mind the timing to put those legumes in the fall.
Right. And even in the spring, allowing them to grow longer to accumulate more biomass will have an impact as well.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, and then finally, we have brassicas, mustards, and other broadleaf cover crops. So typically when we think of this class of cover crops, majority of them winter kill, and those will decompose quickly, whether they winter kill or we have to terminate them. Brassicas that we expect to winter kill should not be seeded alone because of that nutrient loss through the winter and early spring that we talked about previously. They just decompose so quickly, those nutrients are subject to loss. And then we have a lot of research to be done, but there are a few species that we know do some cool things. So buckwheat is one that really helps us scavenge phosphorus and release it in available forms as the plant breaks down. So again, that a lot of work to be done in nutrient management, particularly phosphorus and potassium are pretty interesting. But we do know that they are going to help cycle those nutrients and make them more available over the long term. I would like to note at the bottom of our webpage, we do have additional nutrient management resources. So these come from across the Midwest and have a whole host of article topics on nutrient management with your cover crop plan. And other than that, I want to thank everyone for joining.